Oh, and we've been specially invited to the event. The invitation arrived this morning. Really? In that case, let's attend. What about you? Will you have any duties that day? No, I haven't been asked to help, so I'll go with you. So, we prepared for the event day. It's great that it's sunny today, I said. Really, it is, she agreed. The weather was perfect, and by the time we arrived at the venue, it was already quite crowded. All right, see you later, I said. Okay. I saw someone I knew in the crowd and decided to part ways with Jennifer for a while. About an hour later, when I headed to the guest table where we were supposed to meet, I saw Jennifer standing by the table, not sitting down. Her usually bright and cheerful face was unusually tense and somewhat puzzled. What's going on? I wondered, trying to figure out what was troubling my wife. I squinted to get a better look, and to my surprise, where our seats were supposed to be, there was a trash can instead of chairs. In front of Jennifer, who was left standing, was a man in a suit with a nasty smirk, saying something to her. Sensing the tension, I hurried over to them. Soon, I heard the man say, "I thought a trash can would be perfect for a trash thief like you." The man was clearly mocking Jennifer, dripping with sarcasm. I was stunned by his rudeness, but Jennifer calmly replied, "For your information, I am not a thief. President Thomas has approved donating discarded products to the soup kitchen." I started to understand the situation, realizing it was about the sweets Thomas's company donates to the soup kitchen. I was angry at him for calling Jennifer a thief and was about to step in when I noticed a woman also watching the exchange with concern. She had a Thomas's company employee badge around her neck. I decided to ask her who the man insulting Jennifer was. "Excuse me, who is that man?" I asked, sitting over. You can click on share and more to see if there is a part 2. Update. My wife invited me to her company gathering, where a major shareholder was present. Her boss said, "A trash employee deserves a trash seat, right?" My wife was seated next to the garbage can. I responded, "Then your next position is at the dump." Part 2. Oh, I'm a friend of Jennifer. It looks like there's some trouble, and I'm worried. When I mentioned I was a friend of Jennifer's, the woman's weariness seemed to ease, and she responded with a complicated expression. "That man is Chris, our company's finance manager. He's President Thomas's nephew and, well, he's a bit of a problem. Apparently, Chris uses his position to constantly harass his subordinates, especially young female employees. Jennifer called out his behavior, and Chris resented this, so he started harassing her in retaliation. The theft accusation was just another one of Chris's baseless claims." The woman reluctantly explained the situation to me. "I'm sorry. We employees should stand up to Chris, but I feel bad for Jennifer. Chris often flaunts his connection as the president's nephew, so no one but Jennifer dares to stand up to him." At that moment, I heard Chris's loud laugh as he continued to insult Jennifer. "Hey, there's some trash lying around here." Chris then threw a dirty towel, which he had used, right at Jennifer's face. Luckily, the towel only grazed her shoulder and fell to the ground. I couldn't watch any longer. I quickly picked up the fallen towel and threw it back at Chris. "Honey, weren't you taught in kindergarten that trash goes in the trash can?" I glared at Chris, shielding Jennifer, who was startled by my sudden appearance. The towel I threw grazed Chris's cheek. His face turned bright red as he kicked back his chair and stood up, storming toward me. "Hey, old man, what the hell are you doing?" But I stood firm, still protecting Jennifer behind me, and retorted, "I could ask you the same thing. Throwing trash at someone? If you're so interested in trash, why don't you switch careers to a waste management facility?" Chris, not expecting a comeback, widened his eyes in surprise but soon scowled in anger. "Old man, do you know who I am?" Chris stomped his feet like a child, and I watched him with a mix of disdain and indifference. Then a panicked employee, who must have heard the commotion, rushed over to Chris and whispered in his ear. "That's Mr. Johnson, our major shareholder." "What? Major shareholder? Mr. Johnson?" Chris's face went pale, and he stumbled backward, collapsing into the chair behind him. He muttered in a small, shocked voice, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Could it be Johnson?" Chris muttered, staring at me and then at Jennifer behind me. Jennifer confirmed his suspicion by calmly saying, "This is my husband." "Nice to meet you. I'm Mike, Jennifer's husband." "It seems you've been taking good care of her," I said, glaring at Chris, who gasped in disbelief. "No way. That Johnson. This old lady's husband is the major shareholder?" The name Johnson is common, so Chris never imagined Jennifer was married to the major shareholder. Jennifer herself would never boast about being the wife of a major shareholder, so only a few senior employees knew we were married. But regardless of which Johnson she was, there was no excuse for his horrible insults. Staring straight at the still pale Chris, I said, "By the way, I have a friend who runs a waste management facility. Coincidentally, I just met him at this event. He mentioned they're short-staffed. Shall I introduce you?" Chris's eyes widened at my pointed sarcasm, but even as he sat there terrified, he stubbornly continued to whine like a spoiled child. "Don't get cocky just because you're a major shareholder. You can't interfere with the company's personnel decisions." I was astonished by his audacity, trying to act reasonable now. It was pointless. I suppressed a sigh and nodded slightly. "Well, that's true. As a shareholder, it's not my place to meddle in company personnel decisions." I paused, glaring intensely at Chris, who let out a frightened squeak. "But as a shareholder, I have the right to make recommendations. After that, it's up to him to decide." I said this quietly and shifted my gaze behind Chris. Following my gaze, he turned around. There stood Thomas, the president of Thomas's company, looking furious. "Uncle?" Chris called out in a high-pitched voice, terrified at the sight of his enraged uncle. He collapsed to the floor, unable to stay in his chair. Thomas glared at his nephew with far more intensity than I had. "You harassed Jennifer of all people? What on earth were you thinking?" But I didn't know this old lady, Mrs. Johnson, was a major shareholder. Seeing him tear up while making excuses, I thought his nerve was impressive but wished he'd use it for better purposes. However, his excuses didn't work on his uncle. Thomas grabbed his nephew by the collar and yelled at him from close range. "Jennifer is a savior of our company." Then Thomas began to recount Jennifer's story. This was before Jennifer and I met. Thomas had quit his job and used all his savings to start Thomas's company, driven by a desire to boost local industries. But back then, his marketing efforts weren't successful. Although the sweets tasted great, no customers came. Thomas's company soon faced financial difficulty. Many products had to be discarded, and he was in trouble. Jennifer, who was then working as a clerk, suggested that they donate the unsold sweets to a local soup kitchen. Thomas thought it was a brilliant idea. It cost money to dispose of the sweets, and if his company's products could contribute to society, it was a win-win situation. At that time, Thomas didn't know I was involved with that volunteer group, so when I introduced Jennifer as my fiancée, Thomas was quite surprised. We were all grateful for the strange connection that brought us together. You can click on share and more to see if there is a part 3. Final update. My wife invited me to her company gathering, where a major shareholder was present. Her boss said, "A trash employee deserves a trash seat, right?" My wife was seated next to the garbage can. I responded, "Then your next position is at the dump." Part 3. Us together. Anyway, Thomas's company started donating unsold sweets thanks to Jennifer's suggestion. One day, a local media outlet featured their activities on their channel. They highlighted it as a model case of corporate social responsibility and deepening ties with the community. It was a short 5-minute segment, but it was well put together, and Thomas's good nature came through the screen. An influencer from the area happened to see the program and was deeply impressed. He shared Thomas's company's activities and products on his account in a way that resonated with younger audiences. In no time, this spread like wildfire across social media. Eventually, Thomas's company's activities were featured on a national information program. As a result, Thomas's company's popularity soared, and orders for their sweets flooded in from all over the country. The sweets were already delicious, and customers who ordered out of curiosity were surprised by the taste. Word of Thomas's company spread even more through word of mouth. A year later, Thomas's company won first place in the East region in a Best Sweets for Souvenirs ranking organized by a famous travel guidebook. Do you understand? We can host this event today all because of Jennifer's suggestion back then, Thomas said, savoring the memory, while Jennifer smiled brightly beside him. Actually, this story is Thomas's favorite when he's drunk. At our wedding, he shared this story during his best man speech, crying so much that calming him down was really tough, even though Jennifer repeatedly told him, "Please stop, it's embarrassing." Thomas never listened, so she eventually gave up. After finishing the story for his nephew, Thomas let out a big sigh as if he were expelling all the air from his lungs. "Your mother begged me to hire you. She even got down on her knees. She was desperate because you kept getting fired from every job, so I reluctantly agreed to take you in." I had heard before that Thomas and his sister didn't get along well. During Thomas's company's tough times, she barely responded to his calls, but as soon as the company started doing well, she frequently visited him, pretending to be a caring relative. Despite being treated poorly, Thomas couldn't completely reject his sister, so she took advantage of his kindness and pushed her troublesome son onto him. "Uncle, please stop." "Not here," Chris yelled, his face turning red with shame and frustration as he was scolded in front of many employees. But Thomas didn't care about his nephew's feelings and shouted at him, "Shut up. Even someone as thoughtless as you can apologize to Jennifer and Johnson." Chris's eyes darted around, but he finally gave in and hung his head. Then, in a tiny voice, he apologized to us. "I'm sorry." I apologized as well. It was truly unacceptable for my nephew to behave so rudely. Seeing Thomas apologize with his nephew, Jennifer and I hurried to stop him. "It's okay. Yes, Chris's work attitude is a problem, but I didn't intend for him to be forced to apologize like this." "Exactly, Thomas. Please raise your head. As long as Jennifer and I aren't treated unfairly, that's enough." Both of us urged Thomas, who finally lifted his head, smiled warmly, and said, "Thank you." Then, turning to the crowd that had gathered during the commotion, he apologized again and spoke cheerfully to change the atmosphere. "Everyone, I'm sorry for the disturbance with our internal matter. Today at our sales booth, we are giving away one of Thomas's company's most popular dorayaki to each person for free. Please stop by and get one as a memento of today's event." As Thomas, with his round face like a dorayaki,